History flows like a river. Tell us what happened today in history.
Today, 412 years ago, on May 14, 1607, Britain successfully established its first colony. Spain was not the only bandit to set foot on the American continent, but followed closely by Portuguese, Dutch, French and British. After Britain defeated Spain's invincible fleet in 1588, 16th year of Ming Wanli, the Netherlands and Britain became new oceanic hegemony and began to expand to the American continent. In December 1606, Ming Wanli 34, when Chuang Wang Li Zicheng was born. 3 sailing vessels set sail from London port and were dispatched by the London Virginia Company. Captain Newport, with the charter of King James I, led 150 crew members to the Americas. They have 3 main purposes: to search for American gold like Spaniards, to block Spaniards from the North American continent, and to find a way to Asia. After 6 months of sea voyage, at the cost of nearly 40 people buried in the sea, on April 26, 1607, 35 years in Ming Wanli, the fleet arrived at the south shore of Chesapeake Bay, Virginia, in the middle of the eastern coast of North America. On May 14, 1607, 50 kilometers up the river, the British succeeded in establishing their first colony, Jamestown. It is 180 kilometers north of Washington, the later capital of the United States. The Europeans enclosed their territory with wooden fences and artillery to guard against attacks by the Native Americans. Since then, the British have built 13 colonies on the east coast of North America, and large numbers of criminals have been exiled in North America. When Europeans set foot on the American continent, 20 million Indians were slaughtered, and the 3 ancient civilizations of the Americas, Inca, Aztec and Maya, were extinct. 300 years later, 1907, 50 kilometers southeast of Jamestown, where British colonists landed in America, the United States began to build the world's largest naval base, Norfolk Naval Base, which has 5 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers for many years. Next to it is Newport News Shipyard, the only carrier shipyard in the United States, built in 1886. Today, before 2008, on May 14, 1811, Paraguay declared its independence. Paraguay is a landlocked country in South America. It is adjacent to Argentina, Bolivia and Brazil. Located in the north of La Plata Plain, the Paraguay River divides the whole country from north to south into east and west parts. The eastern part is hilly, swamp and undulated plain, where more than 90% of the population is concentrated. The western part is primitive forest and grassland. It has a subtropical climate, with an average temperature of 27 C in summer and 17 C in winter. The average annual precipitation in the east is 1,500 mm and in the west 500 mm. Originally an Indian Guarani residence. It became a Spanish colony in 1537. Independence was declared on May 14, 1811. In 1865, in order to expand its territory, the Lopez government attacked the southwestern region of Brazil at that time. The coalition forces of Brazil, Argentina and Uruguay declared war on Pakistan. The war lasted 5 years. Paraguay was defeated. The Lopez government cut its territory by nearly half, lost its seaport and became a landlocked country. After the 1970s, the Red Party and the Liberal Party took turns in power. From 1932 to 1935, Pakistan and Bolivia fought a Chaco War for oil resources. The 2 sides signed a peace agreement and Pakistan acquired 3/4 of the land in Chaco. On May 4, 1954, a coup was launched by Army soldier Stroessner and the right wing of the Red Party, and military dictatorship lasted for 35 years. On February 2, 1989, Rodriguez, commander of the 1st Military Region of Pakistan, launched a coup to overthrow the dictatorship of Stroessner and was elected president in May of the same year. In the 1993 presidential election, the Red Party candidate Basmusi won and established the first elected civilian government after 1954. In May 1998, Red Party presidential candidate Cuvas was elected president. In March 1999, Vice President and Chairman of the Red Party Agania were assassinated. Coup was forced to resign. Speaker Gonzalez took over as president and formed a coalition government dominated by the Red Party. In April 2003, Red Party presidential candidate Duarte was elected president. On April 21, 2008, the opposition candidate for the National League for Change, former Bishop Lugo, was elected president with 40.83% of the votes, ending the 61-year history of the Red Party's successive administration. The third Olympiad of the modern era, and the first Olympic Games to be held in the United States, opens in St. Louis, Missouri. The 1904 Games were actually initially awarded to Chicago, Illinois, but were later given to St. Louis to be staged in connection with the St. Louis World Exposition. Like the Second Olympiad, held in Paris in 1900, the St. Louis Games were poorly organized and overshadowed by the World's Fair. There were few entrants other than Americans in the various events, and, expectedly, U.S. athletes won a majority of the competitions and the unofficial team championship. In the field events, the Americans made a near-perfect sweep, winning everything but lifting the bar and throwing the 56-pound weight. 20 years later, the first truly successful Olympic Games were held in Paris, and since then, with increasing popularity, the Games have been held in various cities around the globe. Today, 71 years ago, on May 14, 1948, Israel officially declared its founding. On May 14, 1948, 31 years after the British Balfour Declaration on Jewish rights to establish a national home in Palestine was issued, and within an hour after the British Trust of Palestine, David Ben-Gurion announced the establishment of the State of Israel and became Prime Minister of the interim government of the new state. Chaim Weizmann, who has been the incarnation of the Zionist cause for many years, was nominated as the Prime Minister of the new state. The first president of the country. Zionism drew tremendous strength from the genocidal persecution of Jews during Nazi rule, but there was pain at the birth of Israel. Both Jews and Arabs committed terrorist atrocities, such as the bombing of King David Hotel in Jerusalem in 1946 by the terrorist organization Irgun and the bombing of Arabs in the same city in 1948, which caused instability. After the massacre in the village of Del Yassin, the Arabs fled in large numbers and sowed the seeds of the future problem of Palestine refugees. The international response to Israel's declaration of independence was swift. President Truman immediately recognized the interim government, as did Stalin. Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq and Jordan immediately mobilized their forces to deal with the new country and launched the First Middle East War. However, the attacks of the Arab forces were inconsistent. By the end of the year, the Israeli army, which had reached 100,000 troops, had won decisive victory. On May 14, 1948, in Tel Aviv, Jewish Agency Chairman David Ben-Gurion proclaims the State of Israel, establishing the first Jewish state in 2,000 years. In an afternoon ceremony at the Tel Aviv Art Museum, Ben-Gurion pronounced the words, "We hereby proclaim the establishment of the Jewish state in Palestine, to be called Israel," prompting applause and tears from the crowd gathered at the museum. Ben-Gurion became Israel's first premier. In the distance, the rumble of guns could be heard from fighting that broke out between Jews and Arabs immediately following the British Army withdrawal earlier that day. Egypt launched an air assault against Israel that evening. Despite a blackout in Tel Aviv, and the expected Arab invasion, Jews joyously celebrated the birth of their new nation, especially after word was received that the United States had recognized the Jewish state. At midnight, the State of Israel officially came into being upon termination of the British Mandate in Palestine. Modern Israel has its origins in the Zionism movement, established in the late 19th century by Jews in the Russian Empire who called for the establishment of a territorial Jewish state after enduring persecution. In 1896, Jewish-Austrian journalist Theodor Herzl published an influential political pamphlet called The Jewish State, which argued that the establishment of a Jewish state was the only way of protecting Jews from antisemitism. Herzl became the leader of Zionism, convening the First Zionist Congress in Switzerland in 1897. Ottoman-controlled Palestine, the original home of the Jews, was chosen as the most desirable location for a Jewish state, and Herzl unsuccessfully petitioned the Ottoman government for a charter. After the failed Russian Revolution of 1905, growing numbers of Eastern European and Russian Jews began to immigrate to Palestine, joining the few thousand Jews who had arrived earlier. The Jewish settlers insisted on the use of Hebrew as their spoken language. With the collapse of the Ottoman Empire during World War I, Britain took over Palestine. In 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, which declared its intent to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Although protested by the Arab states, the Balfour Declaration was included in the British Mandate over Palestine, which was authorized by the League of Nations in 1922. Because of Arab opposition to the establishment of any Jewish state in Palestine, British rule continued throughout the 1920s and 30s. Beginning in 1929, Arabs and Jews openly fought in Palestine, and Britain attempted to limit Jewish immigration as a means of appeasing the Arabs. As a result of the Holocaust in Europe, many Jews illegally entered Palestine during World War II. Radical Jewish groups employed terrorism against British forces in Palestine, which they thought had betrayed the Zionist cause. At the end of World War II, in 1945, the United States took up the Zionist cause. Britain, unable to find a practical solution, referred the problem to the United Nations, which in November 1947 voted to partition Palestine. The Jews were to possess more than half of Palestine, although they made up less than half of Palestine's population. The Palestinian Arabs, aided by volunteers from other countries, fought the Zionist forces, but by May 14, 1948, the Jews had secured full control of their UN-allocated share of Palestine and also some Arab territory. On May 14, Britain withdrew with the expiration of its mandate, and the State of Israel was proclaimed. The next day, forces from Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq invaded. The Israelis, though less well-equipped, managed to fight off the Arabs and then seize key territory, such as Galilee, the Palestinian coast, and a strip of territory connecting the coastal region to the western section of Jerusalem. In 1949, UN-brokered ceasefires left the State of Israel in permanent control of this conquered territory. The departure of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs from Israel during the war left the country with a substantial Jewish majority. During the Third Arab-Israeli conflict, the Six-Day War of 1967, Israel again greatly increased its borders, capturing from Jordan, Egypt, and Syria the Old City of Jerusalem, the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. In 1979, Israel and Egypt signed an historic peace agreement in which Israel returned the Sinai in exchange for Egyptian recognition and peace. Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization (PLO) signed a major peace accord in 1993, which envisioned the gradual implementation of Palestinian self-government in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The Israeli-Palestinian peace process moved slowly, however, and in 2000 major fighting between Israelis and Palestinians resumed in Israel and the occupied territories. The Soviet Union and 7 of its European satellites sign a treaty establishing the Warsaw Pact, a mutual defense organization that put the Soviets in command of the armed forces of the member states. The Warsaw Pact, so named because the treaty was signed in Warsaw, included the Soviet Union, Albania, Poland, Romania, Hungary, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Bulgaria as members. The treaty called on the member states to come to the defense of any member attacked by an outside force, and it set up a unified military command under Marshal Ivan S. Konev of the Soviet Union. The introduction to the treaty establishing the Warsaw Pact indicated the reason for its existence. This revolved around Western Germany, which is being remilitarized, and her inclusion in the North Atlantic Bloc, which increases the danger of a new war and creates a threat to the national security of peace-loving states. This passage referred to the decision by the United States and the other members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization (NATO) on May 9, 1955 to make West Germany a member of NATO and allow that nation to remilitarize. The Soviets obviously saw this as a direct threat and responded with the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact remained intact until 1991. Albania was expelled in 1962 because, believing that Russian leader Nikita Khrushchev was deviating too much from strict Marxist orthodoxy, the country turned to Communist China for aid and trade. In 1990, East Germany left the pact and reunited with West Germany. The reunified Germany then became a member of NATO. The rise of non-communist governments in other Eastern Bloc nations, such as Poland and Czechoslovakia, throughout 1990 and 1991 marked an effective end of the power of the Warsaw Pact. In March 1991, the military alliance component of the pact was dissolved, and in July 1991, the last meeting of the political consultative body took place. On May 14, 2008, the Swiss Rocket Man flew over the Alps. Former Swiss fighter pilot Rossi spent 5 years building and perfecting the power wing suit, which he wore yesterday to jump out of a small plane. When he jumped off a 2,250-meter plane, he deployed a 3-meter power wing tied behind him. When he switched from freefall to taxi, he started 4 engines, which accelerated his flight to 304 kilometers per hour. After climbing to 780 meters, he dived again to the ground, leaving behind a trail of special effects smoke. Rossi, 48, said he planned to fly across the English Channel later this year and the Grand Canyon in the United States after completing his feat of flying over the Alps. To complete these plans, he had to install stronger engines to gain greater freedom. The current 4 aircraft engines provide 800 pounds of thrust, enough to allow 1,101 pounds of foldable wings and Rossi to climb at 60 meters per minute. Physically, it's absolutely not stressful, Rossi said. It's like riding on a motorcycle, but I have to relax, because if I have any tension, I start shaking. If something goes wrong, I can press Huang's handle to lose the power wing and open the spare umbrella.